little girl knocked on his door in the rain. Her mother waited behind a tree. The knock came at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, maybe later. I don't keep a clock in the cabin. Rain had been going since sundown, that flat, cold kind that falls straight down without any wind behind it and turns the yard to soup, and makes the creek sound big and close in the dark, even though it's a quarter-mile off. I was at the table with the lantern turned low, not reading, just sitting the way a man does when the day is done and the fire is enough company. I had one hand around a cold cup of coffee, and I was looking at the far wall, which is not a wall I have any particular feeling about. I had been looking at it for maybe an hour. 3 knocks small, spaced out like whoever made them had to think between each one. Not a man's knock, not the loose-fisted urgency of someone who needed in quickly. 3 careful, deliberate, small knocks, each one separate like a person counting them. I took the rifle off the hooks beside the door before I opened it. That was habit, not fear. I'd been alone on this piece of ground for going on 6 years, and the territory had a way of testing a man's attention the same way a difficult horse does, always when you think you've got nothing left to prove. You stop paying attention, something happens. I hadn't stopped paying attention in 6 years, and I didn't see a reason to start. I lifted the bar and opened the door. She was maybe 5 years old, maybe 6. Hard to judge with a child that soaked through. Barefoot on my porch step in November rain, wearing a calico dress that was plastered flat against her like a second skin, brown hair matted to her forehead in strings. Her feet on my wet boards had gone bluish-purple from the cold. She looked up at me, and the look she gave me was not what I expected from a barefoot child standing in the dark in the rain at 10 o'clock at night. Not frightened, not pleading. She was conducting an appraisal. Careful and serious, the way a good stock buyer looks at a horse he's considering taking in information, not yet committed. I looked past her into the dark yard, the lane, the fence line. The big oak at the corner post, which was the only landmark you could make out, standing black against a slightly less black sky. Nothing. Just rain coming down silver in the lamplight from behind me, mud in the yard and the dark beyond that. "You got food," the girl said. Not hello, not please, not any preamble at all. Just that straight, like she'd been thinking about that exact question the whole way here and didn't see any reason to slow down now that she'd arrived. "Come inside," I said. She didn't move. She looked at the rifle in my left hand and then at my face, and she said, "I have to ask my mama first." I stood there a moment. Then I turned and leaned the rifle against the inside wall where she couldn't see it from the doorway and stepped back. "Go ask her," I said. "Then come back." She turned and ran off the porch into the dark without any hesitation, bare feet slapping the wet boards and then the mud and then gone. I stood in the doorway and listened. Heard her footsteps fade toward the fence. Heard the rain on the cabin roof and the creek running big. Then from the direction of the oak, maybe 60 feet, 70, a low exchange of voices. Too low and too far to make out words, just the shape of them, a child's pitch and a woman's underneath, the quality of urgency in the woman's and something stubborn in the child's. Then footsteps coming back. The girl came back at a trot with her arms wrapped around her chest. She stopped at the bottom porch step and looked up at me. "She says thank you for the offer," the girl said. She had the careful, precise diction of a child who has been told to repeat messages exactly as given. "She says we'll leave before morning and won't be any trouble." I looked past her into the dark. The woman was back there behind the oak in November rain with her child standing wet on a stranger's porch. I thought about what it takes to get to a situation like that. What kind of distance you have to have covered, what kind of trouble you have to be running from, before a woman in the rain in the dark tells her child to go knock on a stranger's door and ask if he's got food. "Go back and tell your mama I'm nobody to be afraid of," I said. "Tell her the fire's going and both of you are welcome in out of the rain." The girl looked at me, that same appraisal. Then she turned and ran back into the dark. I got the second lantern down from the shelf and lit it, and put it in the window where it could be seen. Her name was Dara. She came across the yard the way she would come across every yard I ever watched her cross in the years after, walking like a woman who has made a decision and is carrying it out. Straight back, head up. She was wet through worse than the child was, and she was carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder that was heavy from the way her arm hung with it, and she wore a man's coat a size too large, her husband's coat, I later learned. And for all of that she came across my muddy yard in the dark and rain like she owned the ground under her feet. She came up onto the porch and she looked at me. Not past me. Not at the lamp in the window or at the rifle she could probably see from there. At me. The same measuring quality her daughter had, but more seasoned, more experience behind it. A woman who had been reading people carefully for a long time and was doing it now. "We don't need much," she said. Her voice was level. No apology in it, no pleading, no performance. Just the statement of a woman who had assessed the situation and decided what it required. "A night out of the rain, whatever food you can spare. We'll be on our way before first light." "You can have what's here," I said. "Both of you come in." She held my eyes for a beat longer than she needed to, still settling whatever she was settling. Then she stepped inside. I let her take in the room. I've had time to think about what she saw. A single lamp turned low, the table with the cold coffee and nothing else on it, one coat on the peg, 2 tin cups on the shelf, both the same, the floor clean but in the way of a man's clean, which is its own thing, a rifle against the wall, a bed in the far corner, one blanket, no other bedding visible, a pantry shelf stocked adequately for one, a stack of firewood that was well built and substantial, a roof that didn't leak. A cabin that was clearly sound, clearly the result of real work, clearly built for exactly the number of people who had been living in it. She set the bag down by the hearth and started unbuttoning the girl's dress, quick and efficient. The hands of a woman who has done this task 1,000 times in every kind of circumstance, and needs nothing particular from the circumstance to do it right. "Nell," she said. The girl stepped forward. I took their wet things and hung them on the peg and on the drying line above the stove. I cut the last of the morning's cornbread and cracked 4 eggs into the skillet and got the coffee going hot again. Dara had the spare blanket roll off the shelf. She'd found it without asking and without hesitation, which meant she was a woman who looked for what was needed and used it. And she had Nell dried and wrapped and settled by the fire before the eggs were done. Nobody talked much through the eating. Nell ate the way a child eats when she's been moving all day without enough to eat straight through, without pausing or looking up, working at it. Dara ate more carefully, measuring herself, the habit of a woman who had been making food last. I sat across the table with my refilled coffee and I looked mostly at the fire, because a woman in a frightened state doesn't want a man studying her across a table. What she wants is a room where the man isn't treating her like a problem. He's in the process of figuring out. I wasn't figuring anything out. I was waiting for whatever she was going to tell me, in whatever time she needed to tell it. Nell went asleep in the middle of a breath, the sudden complete way children sleep, head going down onto her arms on the table. Dara caught her and eased her down to the floor by the hearth and tucked the blanket around her feet and stayed crouched there for a moment looking at her daughter. Then she straightened up and looked at me with the eyes that had been measuring from the start, and I could see they had finished measuring. "His name is Cord Haley," she said. She laid it out plain. Josiah, her husband, a quiet man, careful man, a decent farmer, dead of a fever in February. 40 acres of bottomland on the Monongahela, good acres, coming to Dara in the will. Cord Haley, Josiah's older brother, arriving within the month with a lawyer and a friendly manner and papers filed in Pendleton County establishing Nell as a ward of the Haley family. The judge in Pendleton County being the cousin of Cord's wife. The land being tied to Nell's upbringing in the papers, which meant the papers were about the land more than the child, but dressed up the other way around. She had understood what was happening by the 3rd week, and had left before the 4th. "He has a man with him," she said. "Red Beecham." I'd heard the name while Josiah was still alive, and not in a way that told me Mr. Beecham was any kind of gentleman. "How close behind you?" I said. "Since yesterday morning for certain, maybe 2 days." I knew Beecham's name. Not well, but the frontier talks when it talks, and what I'd heard about Beecham was consistent with the description of a man who made himself professionally available to others who wanted things done at a distance from their own hands. "The ward papers," I said. "They were filed in Pendleton County." "Yes." "Then in this county they're a starting point, not a conclusion. I know a lawyer in Morgantown who can give me the reading on it, and I know the deputy." I looked at her straight. "You'll stay here until the roads are passable and until I've had those conversations. Cord Haley is going to find this stop more difficult than he's expecting." She held my eyes. "You don't know him." "I don't need to," I said. Not bravado, understand that. I was 44 years old, and I'd been a militiaman for 7 of those years. And in 7 years, you learn to tell the difference between men who have real weight behind them and men who have only ever met obstacles that moved out of their way. Cord Haley, from everything she described, was the second kind. He had papers and a hired man and the expectation of compliance. Those are powerful things when they work. When they meet something that doesn't move, they're not much. I knew what I was. I had been tested, and I knew. Dara held my look for a long moment, and something let go in her. Not collapse, she didn't collapse, not then, not ever that I saw. But a quality of tension that had been in her since February, maybe since before February, maybe the accumulated tension of 11 days of running with a child on bad roads in November. It eased, for one breath. She sat down in the chair across from me and put her face in her hands and breathed. Just breathed. Slow and steady. Not crying. A woman who has been carrying a very heavy thing and is setting it down for 1 minute before she picks it up again. I got up and put another log on the fire. Let her have the minute. She came back out of it on her own, the same way she'd gone into it, without drama, without any request for acknowledgement. She lifted her face from her hands and looked at the fire for a moment, and then looked at me. "I've been asking myself all week why I knocked on your door instead of going past," she said. "There were other lights, closer ones." "What did you decide?" I said. She thought about it. "There was something about the lantern you put in the window," she said. "After Nell went back the second time. The other lights they were just lights. That one felt like an answer." She paused. "Maybe I'm wrong about that." "Maybe," I said. She looked at me. "Are you a man people usually aren't afraid of?" I thought about how to answer that. "I've been told I'm steady," I said. "I've been told it's hard to read what I'm thinking. Some people find that reassuring, and some people find it the other thing." "Nell found it reassuring," she said. "She doesn't trust people easily." "She gets that from me." She looked at the fire again. "She had it sorted out about you before she came back the second time. I could tell from the way she walked." I thought about the girl's walk, the certainty in it coming back across the yard. "What about you?" I said. She looked at me again, and the question settled somewhere, and she thought about it properly, the way she did everything. "I had it sorted out when you put the lantern in the window," she said. "I just needed Nell to confirm it. I'll tell you a little about myself, because it matters to the rest of it. I came from Allegheny County. 4th son of a farmer who worked hard all his life and died at 52, which is what hard work does sometimes, and a mother who was still alive the last I heard, living with my oldest brother. I had no inheritance to speak of and no expectation of one, which turned out to be useful. A man without an inheritance learns earlier than most that what he ends up with is going to be what he builds. I joined the militia at 22, 7 years. I'm not going to tell you everything about those 7 years because most of it is not interesting unless you were there, and some of it is not interesting even then. What I'll say is that the militia in those years in that territory was not a comfortable posting. The frontier was genuinely frontier. The disputes that came up were genuine disputes, over land, over water rights, over which laws applied where and whether they applied at all. There was real violence and the threat of more of it, and you learned, if you had any sense, to read situations quickly and to know the difference between a man who would push as far as he needed to and a man who would stop when he met something that didn't give. I got a reputation in those years that I didn't entirely choose and didn't entirely object to. People said I was steady. People said you could put me in a bad situation and come back an hour later, and I'd still be there, still thinking, still in the same disposition. A sergeant told me once that I had the quality of a man who was already past the fear and was working on the problem. I didn't know then if that was a compliment or just a description, and I'm not entirely sure now. I left the militia at 29. I've been planning the land and saving the money since I was 25, putting by a little from every pay period, thinking about what I wanted the place to be, reading what I could get my hands on about soil and drainage and timber. Eleanor was from a family near Morgantown, and I'd met her through a cousin, and by the time I had the land deed she'd agreed to come out with me. She was a woman of good sense and real warmth, and she would have loved this piece of ground. I'm certain of that. She would have known things to do with it that I've only figured out slowly, or not yet figured out at all. She died in the June before I was going to leave. I sat with her through it. Then I buried her, and I settled what needed settling, and I came anyway, because the plan had been made and the land was waiting, and I had nothing left to do in Allegheny County that couldn't be done without me. I built the cabin that first winter, in the cold, which is the wrong time to do it, but I had the timber already felled and the foundation dug, and I needed to be working. I built it right. I took the extra time to do the chinking right and to get the roof pitch right and to hang the door true in its frame, not because anyone was watching, but because I had decided in some deep part of myself that this place was going to be what it needed to be. And that meant doing it right, even alone, even in the cold, even when there was nobody to know the difference. 6 years of that. The place was good. It worked. It was mine in the way that a thing is yours when you've made every part of it, but it was quiet in a way that got quieter each year rather than easier to live with, and I had stopped thinking too carefully about that because it wasn't a problem I could work on the way I could work on a fence line or a drainage ditch. And then 3 knocks on my door on a Tuesday night. The next few days are what I want to tell you about most carefully, because they were not dramatic days. Nothing much happened in them, which is why they matter. Dara was not a woman who sat idle while things needed doing, and there were always things. She reordered my pantry on the second morning while I was doing the feed. I came in and found it organized in a way I hadn't thought to do, by how often things were used rather than by how they fit on the shelf, and everything was findable at a glance in a way it hadn't been before. She mended the strap on the water bucket that had been splitting for a month, and which I kept forgetting because I could work around it. She found the split in the barn door frame that was letting cold air in at night, and got the right piece of scrap from the woodpile and fixed it. And I wouldn't have thought to look for scrap that fit, but she had thought to look. She asked questions about the farm that were not polite questions. How deep was the water table? What the north pasture held in a wet spring, whether it drained or sat? What the soil was here, clay or loam or a mix? What had grown in the garden before I put it in, and whether there were years it had struggled? The south exposure on the barn, was it planned or luck? She listened to the answers and thought about them, not making conversation but actually thinking, and once or twice she said something back that was a real observation, the kind you make when you're looking at a place and thinking about what it could be. I found myself thinking about those things too, what the place could be. There were small things I noticed and tried not to make too much of. The first morning she made coffee before I was up, and the smell of it reached me in the far corner of the cabin before I'd opened my eyes, and I lay there for a moment thinking I was somewhere else, remembering what it was like to wake in a house that already had someone moving in it. The way a fire sounds when it's been tended by someone while you were sleeping, different than a fire you banked yourself. The sound of a child's voice from the other room in the morning, talking to herself or to her mother, that ordinary background noise of a life being lived that I had not heard in this cabin before. Mornings had a shape to them that week that they hadn't had before, and evenings did too. Nell talked at supper with the steady, observational quality of a child who has been listening to adults talk seriously all her life and has decided that is how talk goes. She reported things about Absalom. She asked questions about the territory, about the river, about what was east of us and what was north. She wanted to know about the militia, which I gave her a version of that was accurate but edited, and she seemed to understand the editing and not take it against me. Dara said less at supper than Nell did, but she was present in a different way. She listened. She would sometimes stop Nell with a word and redirect the conversation, not silencing her but steering, the practiced hand of a woman who knew her daughter's patterns. Once she asked Nell a question that made the girl laugh, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you out of your face, and Dara smiled at that with a warmth in it that I felt from across the table. I had been eating alone at this table for 6 years. I hadn't known what I was missing, or I had known, and had stopped thinking about it because knowing it wasn't useful. Now it sat in the room with me every meal and I let it. Nell was in charge of Absalom. She had decided this unilaterally on the first morning, and Absalom, who is a complicated horse with strong opinions about most people, had accepted it without his usual reservations. He let her brush him out. He let her talk to him in the low, steady murmur that I recognized as the same kind of thing I did myself in the barn alone, and which I had considered an eccentricity until I understood that she did it too, and it was probably just the right way to be with a horse. I was forking hay one morning with Nell on the fence rail. "What's Absalom like on Tuesdays?" she said. I looked at her. "Where'd you hear about Tuesdays?" "I didn't. My papa's horse was bad on Tuesdays. I'm asking if Absalom is bad on any day specifically." "Absalom is bad on any day someone he doesn't trust comes into the barn," I said. "Otherwise he's reliable." "Does he trust me?" "More than he trusts most people," I said. "More than he trusts me on some mornings." She accepted this gravely. "My papa's horse was called Grundy. He was gray and fat, and he bit fence posts on Tuesdays. Papa said he was the most reliable horse in the county, but you had to keep track of what day it was." I smiled at that. The muscles of my face noticed the smile a little, the way they notice a tool you haven't used in a while. "Do you have a wife?" Nell said. "Had one," I said. "She died." Nell held that without flinching. "Did you love her?" "Yes," I said. She looked at Absalom instead of at me, the way a person does when they're asking something careful. "Mama had Papa. She doesn't say she misses him, but I know she does because she gets a certain face sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking, like she's talking to him in her head." She paused. "She cried one night here when she thought I was asleep. She doesn't usually cry." I put the fork down and looked at the girl on the fence rail. Serious child, not fishing for anything, not performing sadness, just telling me a thing she'd noticed and thought I should know. "Are you going to help us?" she said. "Yes," I said straight, "no conditions on it." She nodded once, the way you do when a thing has been decided, and jumped down from the rail and went back to the cabin. I rode to Morgantown on the afternoon of the third day, 12 miles on the main track with the road still soft from the rain. Left Dara with the bar across the door and the rifle from the back hooks, gave her a plain description of what to do if someone came in the lane while I was gone. She listened without interrupting, and without any pretense that she needed the instructions to be softened. Taggart was in his office above the feed store. Small man with careful eyes and 20 years of knowing which legal papers are iron and which ones are written to look like iron. I laid out what I knew about the Ward filing and the Pendleton County judge and the connection to Cord's wife's family. He listened, and then he went to his cabinet and came back with 2 documents and read them and asked me 3 questions, and then told me what I'd suspected. The papers were real papers, properly filed, signed by a real judge. Inside Pendleton County, in front of that judge's cousin, Cord had a strong position. Outside it, the picture changed. In this county before McMurtry, who was a meticulous man and not susceptible to anything except the strict reading of the law, Cord would face a genuine challenge from a competent lawyer. A widow present, clearly competent, clearly caring properly for the child in question. A will giving the land directly to the widow. The guardianship filing made 5 weeks after the husband's death, originating with the brother-in-law who stood to benefit from the land. McMurtry would see that for what it was. Taggart wrote me a letter summarizing his reading and said he'd be available if matters went to a hearing. Charged me $2. I paid him and went to find Fitch. Harlan Fitch had been the county deputy for 12 years and had the quality, rare enough that you notice it, of making a room feel like less of it belonged to you once he walked in. Not hostile, not aggressive, just certain, in the way of a man who has done his job long enough in difficult circumstances to have settled completely into who he is and what he will and won't do. I'd found him straight in 2 prior dealings, and straight is what I needed now. I told him about Cord and about Beecham. At Beecham's name, something behind his eyes sharpened. "Beecham," he said, "not a question." "He's in the county," I said, "past 3 days at least." Fitch opened his ledger and looked at something in it and closed it. "Beecham has an outstanding matter in Kanawha County from last autumn," he said. "The judge there has been patient. His patience is not without a limit." He looked at me. "You know where he's been staying?" I told him what I knew. He wrote it in his small, careful hand, asked 2 questions, stood up, and got his coat. I rode home in the early dark with Taggart's letter in my breast pocket, and a clearer sense of how the thing was going to settle. Dara had made supper, not just managed supper, made it with thought behind it. She'd found the dried beans and the salt pork in my pantry, and done something with them that smelled like someone had been paying attention at the stove. And there was a flat bread on the iron that I didn't know the name of but recognized as the product of real cooking knowledge. The cabin smelled like a home. Nell was at the table drawing on the back of a feed bill with a piece of charcoal. She didn't look up. Dara turned from the stove when she heard the door, and she read my face. "Good," she said, before I'd said a word. "Better than he's expecting," I said. "Taggart thinks the papers won't survive a challenge here, and Fitch has an active interest in Beecham for something in Kanawha County." She let out a slow breath through her nose, not dramatic, controlled, but real. "Sit down," she said, and turned back to the stove. "Did you see Cord?" Nell said without looking up from the drawing. "Not today," I said. She studied me with those clear eyes. "But you'd win," she said, statement. "Nell," Dara said. "He would though," Nell said, and went back to her drawing. I looked down at the table and let whatever was in my face have a moment to settle before anyone saw it. We ate supper. The food was good in a way that food cooked by someone other than yourself is good, not because it was fancier but because someone else had done the thinking. After, Nell went to the back room and Dara washed the dishes and I dried them, which is not something I had done with another person present in 6 years, and the simple physical fact of it, standing side by side at the washstand, handing a wet tin plate to a waiting hand, had a quality I didn't try to name. After the dishes were done, she pulled the other chair up to the fire and we sat, not talking at first, the fire going and the lamp turned low and the rain outside having settled to a steady whisper on the roof. I had a habit of sitting like this in the evenings with the fire and the quiet, and having her in the other chair changed the quality of it in a way that surprised me. Not worse. Richer somehow. The quiet wasn't the same quiet. "How long did you say you were in the militia?" she said. 7 years. "Did you like it?" I thought about that. I liked the work, I said. The clarity of it. You had a job and you did it. The things I didn't like were the things that came up in any group of men working close together in difficult conditions for a long time. The ones who were good at their jobs and knew it and wanted you to know it. The ones who didn't follow through on what they said they'd do and had a reason for it that they expected you to accept. I thought about it a little more, and there was a lot of real unpleasantness. Things that needed doing that weren't pleasant to do. I did them, but I was glad to be done with it. She was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. Did you have to hurt people? Yes, I said, when there wasn't another way. She nodded, not pressing for more on that. She'd asked the question she wanted to ask and gotten the honest answer, and that was enough. Josiah never did anything like that, she said. He was not that kind of man. He'd have helped if he'd been asked and done his part, but he wasn't. He wasn't made for confrontation. Some men aren't, and it's not a failure, it's just the shape they have. He was very good with the land. He could read a field better than anyone I ever knew, look at it in the spring, and tell you what it was going to do that year. He was patient the way the land is patient. Sounds like a good man to farm with, I said. He was, she said. We were good at different things and they fit together. She paused. That's a rare thing, to find someone whose different things fit yours. The fire cracked. She reached over and took the poker and adjusted a log without getting up, the automatic gesture of someone comfortable enough in a space to tend it. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes, I said. That woman, Alina, she said the name carefully. She died before you came here. You built all of this without her, and you've been here 6 years. She looked at me. Have you been happy? Nobody had asked me that in 6 years. Maybe longer. I sat with it. I've been occupied, I said. There was always enough to do, and I'm not a man who requires a lot, company, or noise or people around. I like the quiet. I like working and seeing what the work does. I've been all right. I looked at the fire. But no, not happy the way I'd understood the word. She nodded slowly. Not with sympathy exactly. Something more particular than sympathy. More like the nod of a person who has been somewhere near that place and knows what it looks like from the inside. I've been all right since February, she said. There's been so much to manage that all right was the best available, but I remember what more than all right felt like. I would like to have it again. She looked at me. That's not asking for anything. I just want you to know that's what I'm thinking about while I'm here. I know, I said. She looked at me steadily, then she turned back to the fire. We sat there another hour, maybe more, mostly without talking, and the fire burned down and I banked it and she went to the back room and I went to the bed in the corner, and that was the 5th night, and I did not sleep badly. The 4th afternoon she came and sat on the big flat stump behind the cabin while I split wood. Just sat, not making conversation, not filling the silence with anything. The sky to the west was still holding a strip of light, that long November twilight, and the air was cold and smelled like pine smoke and river water. I kept the rhythm going. You've been out here alone a long time, she said. 6 years, I said. Since your wife. Alina, she died the spring before I started out. I'd had the land deed 2 years before that, had been planning to build here, had the money put by, she'd been part of the plan. Then one cold April morning she was sick and by June she was gone. I drove them all down. I came without her. I hadn't talked about Alina to anyone in a long time. Not because I was hiding it, more because the people around me already knew it, and the people who didn't know it didn't usually need to. But something in the way Dara listened, without pushing toward it, without any special care in her face to encourage more, made it easy to say. She was quiet a while. Absalom moved somewhere in the barn, that particular bass thud of a horse shifting his weight. Josiah died on a Monday morning in February, she said. I'd brought him his coffee and he said he wasn't feeling right, and by evening he was bad and by Wednesday he was gone. 2 days. I had 15 years with him and then 2 days and then he was gone. She looked out at the pasture. I didn't cry at the burying, People thought I was cold. I wasn't cold. I couldn't get to it yet. Everything that needed doing, and I did it, and then Cord arrived and everything still needed doing. Nell told me I cried one night here, while she was supposed to be asleep. She did tell me that, I said. Dara's mouth moved, not quite a smile. She tells people things, she said. She gets it from her father. I kept splitting, stacked the halves, set the next log. You built this place well, she said, looking at the cabin. Not a compliment the way people use compliments to fill space to make someone feel good, an observation. The chinking is tight, the roof is right, the barn is hung so it'll last. You didn't build the minimum, you built what it needed to be. Had time, I said. She shook her head a small amount, correcting me on a point I was wrong about. Time doesn't give you that, she said. I've seen places built by men with more time than you. They look like time. This looks like someone cared how it turned out when they weren't watching. I set the maul down and looked at her. She was looking at the cabin still, and her eyes were straight and particular. She was saying what she saw, not what she thought I wanted to hear. I picked up the maul and kept going. But I felt it in a place that had been quiet for a while. Cord came on the 5th morning. I'd been sleeping light all week, and when I heard the horse in the lane at 7 o'clock I was already up and dressed and had my coffee cold on the stove. I went to the back room and I told Dara, 2 of them in the lane, I'm going out. Keep Nell inside with the bar on the door. She looked at me, I won't hide. I know you won't, I said. I'm asking for Nell, she doesn't need to see this. Watch from the shutter if you want, I'm not asking you to be blind to it, just keep the bar on. A beat, she nodded. I went out. 2 of them at the edge of my yard. Cord Haley on the big roan, Red Beecham half a length behind him and to his left. Cord was broad through the shoulders and high-colored from the cold and the riding, and he had the settled certainty of a man who has always gotten what he wanted through the combination of his size and his persistence, and a higher tolerance for unpleasantness than the people he was dealing with. That certainty was on him like a coat. He sat the roan like the yard was already his. Beecham was thin and long-faced and professionally still. I came down off the porch and walked to the fence and stopped there with my hands loose. Morning, Cord said. Morning, I said. I'm looking for my brother's widow, woman named Dara Haley, traveling with a small girl. He said it the way you say a formality before getting to what you actually came to do. Seen them. Can't say I have, I said. He looked at the cabin. At me. At the cabin again, in a way that was meant to communicate that he knew I was lying and expected me to understand he knew and proceed accordingly. Mind if I look around, he said. I do mind, I said. This is my land, you weren't invited onto it. His face tightened, not surprised, not exactly. Men like Cord are rarely surprised by resistance. Annoyed. The way you're annoyed when a door doesn't open the way you expected it to open. I've got legal papers, he said. I know about the papers, I said. I had a conversation with a lawyer in Morgantown yesterday about what they mean in this county, which is less than you're counting on. I also spoke to Deputy Fitch about Mr. Beecham, who has a matter outstanding in Kanawha County. The judge down there has been patient about it, but that patience has a limit. I said it the same way I said everything that week, even quiet without heat, just the facts, just what was true. Beecham's horse shifted. Cord sat on the roan and he looked at me and I held it steady. No shifting weight, no looking away, no change in my breathing. This is a thing I learned in 7 years of militia work in situations that were worse than this one. You can perform stillness and some men can't tell the difference, but most men can. What Cord was looking for was the seam, the place where I'd move or hedge or let something doubt-colored show in my face. There wasn't one. I meant every word I'd said, and I meant it all the way to the bottom, and I had nowhere to be. I watched him figure that out. He looked at Beecham. Beecham's face told him nothing, which told him something. Beecham had heard Kanawha County and was doing his own arithmetic, and his arithmetic did not necessarily put him on the same side as Cord. Cord pulled the roan's head around, not smoothly, the way you turn when you've decided to be reasonable about something that costs you. "This isn't done," he said. "Yes, it is," I said. They rode out. I stood at the fence until they were into the tree line and I heard nothing, then stood a little longer to be certain, and then I turned. Dara was in the open doorway, not at the shutter. The door open, standing in it, having seen most of what there was to see. She looked at me across the yard. "You didn't have a gun," she said. "Didn't need one," I said. She held my eyes for a long moment, and what was in her face then was not relief exactly, not simple gratitude. It was recognition, the look of a woman who has been watching carefully and has now seen the specific thing she was watching for. She had watched me come down the porch steps with my hands loose at my sides and stand at my fence without any weapon, and tell a man with a hired gun about what was and what wasn't, quietly, and mean it completely. And she had seen what kind of man does that and why and what it means. I came back across the yard, and she moved from the doorway to let me in, and Nell appeared from behind the door wanting to know what happened. "Cord came," I said. "And," Nell said. "And he left," I said. She appeared to find this adequate and went to find her charcoal. Dara didn't say anything. She went back to the stove and I got the coffee going again, and we moved around each other in the cabin without the need to account for the morning's business in words. But something had shifted and we both knew it. Not in our arrangement, that was what it had been from the first night, in the particular quality of it. She had stood in her doorway and watched me go down to that fence without any weapon and hold what needed holding, and she had seen it clearly, and I had felt myself being seen. That is not a common thing for a man to feel. Most of us go through large portions of our lives visible only to ourselves, which is a loneliness so ordinary we stop calling it that and start calling it independence. What she'd done standing in that doorway, watching, reading, understanding, was not nothing. It was something I hadn't had in a long time and hadn't known I was still wanting. I kept that to myself, but I kept it. Cord came back once more. On the 7th day, alone. Beecham was gone from the county by then, Fitch having made his interest official, and without Beecham, Cord was measurably diminished, like a man who'd been borrowing someone else's weight and had to give it back. He came in the afternoon while I was rehanging the north gate, which had been hanging crooked since September, and which I'd been putting off for lack of a particular size of hinge pin. I heard him in the lane and walked out to the property edge and stood there. He pulled up 10 feet away. He looked different from the first time. The settled certainty was not on him the same way. He was still a large man and still determined, but something of what he'd been wearing that first morning was gone. "I've got no quarrel with you, Callum," he said. "No," I said, "you don't. The woman and the girl, they can go to Wheeling. I won't follow them. Taggart told me his reading of McMurtry, and I don't see the profit in a long legal fight over 40 acres. "That's a sensible conclusion," I said. He looked at me with the residue of what he'd intended this whole thing to be, the certainty, the dominance, the papers. And then he turned the roan around and rode out of my lane, and I watched him until I was satisfied he was going the right direction, and then I went back and finished the gate. It swung clean. I tested it 3 times 4, then I went around the cabin. Dara was in the garden pulling cabbages. The last of them, the big late ones that had held on through the cold. She straightened up when she saw me come around, and she read my face the way she'd been reading my face all week, quick and accurate. "Done," I said. She stood there with a cabbage in both hands and looked down at it. A long moment. Then she looked up at me and she said, "Reuben." First time she'd used my name. She said it like a decision she'd been holding and had now made. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Wheeling, about my aunt." She looked down at the cabbage again, organizing what she wanted to say. My aunt is a good woman. Old, small house, always crowded. She'd take us in without question, and I've been running toward her because I couldn't see where else to run. She looked back up. But I've been here a week, and I've been watching, and I don't think Wheeling is where I'm running toward. I think it's just where the road went. I waited. She had more to say, and she was going to say it in her own order. I've been watching you all week, she said. The way you work. The way you built this place, not just enough but right. The way you stood in that yard without a gun and told those men what was true and what was going to happen, and you said it quiet, and you meant it the whole way through. She held my eyes. I have been a careful woman about what I trust, because I have a daughter and trusting wrong is expensive. But I have been watching you with careful eyes, and I know what I see. She set the cabbage down on the fence post. I'm not asking you to take care of us, she said. I'm not asking out of need. I'm asking because I've seen what you are and I'm choosing it, with my eyes open, knowing the weight of it. Nell and I both. The afternoon light was going long and gold over the pasture. The smell of the turned garden dirt and wood smoke, and the cold clean air, and the river somewhere east. 6 years I'd been alone on this piece of ground. I knew exactly what that felt like, not a sad feeling, more the particular quality of a place that works, that holds itself together, that does what it was built to do but has no breathing in it. No warmth that isn't just the stove. I'd made my accommodation with that. I had thought the accommodation was permanent. There's room, I said. She came across the space between us, 4 steps through the garden dirt, and she put her hand flat against my chest, over the ribs, and she looked up at me and didn't look away. Her hand was cold from the cabbage, and I felt it through the flannel, the specific cold of it, the specific weight of her hand. I covered her hand with mine and held it there. We stood at the garden edge in the afternoon going gold, and I thought about what it means to be chosen. Not rescued, not needed out of a lack of better options, chosen. A woman who had come across a muddy yard in the dark with her daughter walking ahead of her and had been assessing from that first moment on my porch and had watched all week with clear eyes and had seen the work and the years and the stubbornness and the stillness and had decided. Her own judgment, her own will, freely given. That is not a small thing. That is, when it happens, everything. I'll tell you the last piece, because it's the part I remember clearest. That evening Nell came in from the barn with something cupped in both hands, walking with the careful concentration of a child carrying a thing that matters. She came to the table and set it down in the lamplight. A heron feather, long and blue-gray with a white edge. Absalom had it on his post, she said. I think he left it for the house. Did you ask him? Dara said. He said yes, Nell said, with no uncertainty at all. Dara picked up the feather. She held it a moment, feeling the almost nothing weight of it, and then she went and set it in the cracked clay pitcher on the shelf above the window. The pitcher had been empty since I moved into this cabin. Nobody had put anything in it. It had just been there, the way things are when a place is waiting to be more than it is. She stepped back and looked at it. Nell came and stood beside her, and they both tilted their heads at the same angle. Good, Nell said. Yes, Dara said. She glanced at me over Nell's head. I don't know what was in my face, but she held the look for a beat, and something moved in hers, warm and certain and quiet, the thing that comes before a smile and outlasts it. Then she went to see about the evening dishes. Nell picked up her charcoal and her drawing. The fire went on. The lamp made its circle. The feather stood in the pitcher. I got up and poured 2 cups of coffee, set one across the table from me and sat down. Dara saw it when she turned from the washstand. She came and picked it up and sat across from me and put both hands around the warmth of it and looked at the fire. That was the evening. That was all of it, and all of it was enough. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what it was. Not a stroke of luck, not a fairy story. A woman looked at what I was, what I had made here, and how I held it and what I wouldn't bend on, and she chose it. With clear eyes, clear judgment, knowing the full weight of what she was deciding. She sent her daughter across a stranger's dark yard to knock on a door, and she waited behind a tree in the November rain, and when she got inside she watched, and when a week was done she made her choice. That is what a man's life is for. Not the work only, not the ground held or the bad men turned back or the competence proved in 100 ordinary hard situations. Those things matter. They're the foundation of it. But the life is for this, to be seen the whole of it, clearly and truly, and then chosen. Not needed, not convenient, not the best of a narrow set of options. Chosen. By a woman of good sense and good character who looked and decided and came across 4 steps of garden dirt to say so. There is a feather in the pitcher on the shelf. The fire goes at night. There are 3 cups on the shelf now, 2 for us and a small one for Nell. I was 44 years old when it happened to me. I had been out here 6 years, building something on my own that worked and held and was going to last, and I had thought that was going to be the whole of it. A place that worked and a man in it, and the quiet that was the only thing left that was reliably mine. Then a Tuesday night in November, rain going since sundown, cold cup of coffee, a man looking at a wall he has no particular feeling about. 3 small knocks on the door. Her mother waited behind a tree. Worth the wait, every year and every day of it, worth every bit of the wait.